Skinwalker's wrath. I grew up in a small town in Illinois by my aunt after my mother was deemed unfit to raise me by the court. My name is Will. She was an abusive alcoholic and was always leaving me alone by myself. My father was never in the picture, at least that I can remember. He left my mom after getting her pregnant with me. I had been living with my aunt from the age of 5. She was very religious, and so were all of my cousins. When I was ordered to go live with them, she immediately took me to her church and got me baptized and saved. I had dedicated my entire life to the Pentecostal church. As I was growing up, the small church began to grow, and soon they started to branch out across the country, eventually even to as far as New Mexico. I was in my early 20s when they asked me and several other church members if we would be interested in taking a trip to Gallup, New Mexico. Gallup sits right on the edge of the huge Navajo reservation that is out there. We had a sister church that was becoming well established there, and they wanted a few of us to come out and perform an outreach to the community. We would basically go through all of the neighborhoods and pass out flyers and talk to the locals. Our objective was to try and get as many people as possible to come and join their church, and perhaps we could save a few souls in the process. One day while out there, I was assigned with another member. Eric was just a year younger than me, and we got along really well. It was our third outreach for the month, and we decided to go deeper in the reservation than we had at that point. People warned us that crime was rampant in the area we were going, but we believed we had God on our side, so we went anyways. After knocking on several doors and getting mostly the typical responses of having people slam their doors in our faces, we came to an older-style ranch house sitting down the street by itself. It almost looked abandoned. I told Eric when he spotted it. We could start on a new street, but for whatever reason, he insisted we go there and at least try and see if anyone was home. We knocked on the door and waited, but nobody answered. Okay, let's go. Nobody's home. Wait, demanded Eric. Let's try around back. With that, he had jumped off the porch and opened the gate towards the back. Wait, Eric, I yelled. I followed after him and came around the back where he was banging on the screen door. I really don't think anyone is living here, I told him. What little plant life the yard had didn't look like it had been maintained for a while. Eric and I were about to give up when we heard someone inside coughing. Then suddenly I saw him. He was a very elderly Native American man, older than anyone I have ever met personally. At least he looked it. He looked like death. He spoke very softly. Can I help you, young men? We explained who we were and what our mission was. The old man stared at us after we told him this for some time before he started coughing again. This time it was much worse. I almost thought he was dying. He then signaled to us to come inside. Eric looked at me and smiled. Let's go. We entered the old man's house, and immediately I started to get nervous. There were these creepy photographs all down the hallway of these abstract drawings. They looked hideous. What you would expect to see in a nightmare. I tugged on Eric's shirt to show him, and he just shook his head. Sure, he said, as we entered the old man's kitchen. That's when I about threw up. On this man's kitchen table was the dead carcass of what I think was a rabbit. Its entrails were hanging out of an open wound. Flies were buzzing all around it. I must have had a wild expression on my face because the old man told me not to worry. It was dead. I then looked at Eric. My eyes hinted it was time to go, but he wasn't frightened and just ignored me at that point. The old man then had us sit down in his living room and offered us something to drink. We both declined. I was waiting for him to say something else when Eric began his routine of how God had led us here for a reason, and that he loved everyone and wanted to save him. The old man stood up quickly and pointed directly at Eric. He began speaking in his native tongue and screaming. I stood up and yelled at Eric, "Let's go. This was a mistake." "Sorry to have bothered you, sir." That's when he threw some kind of liquid on me from a cup. My shirt was soaked. Whatever it was stunk badly. I grabbed Eric, who I could tell was starting to realize he had made a mistake, and I led him down the hallway to the door. As I began to go outside, the old man grabbed my wrist. I spun around to free myself when he looked right into my eyes and started to mumble something to me, never breaking eye contact. A very grave feeling came over me as I wrestled my arm free from his grip. When I did, he started coughing again, only even worse. He fell against the hallway wall. My instinct was to help him, but the look he was giving me had me in a panic. It was a terrible look full of judgment and contempt, like I just killed someone close to him. I was so afraid and confused I just got the hell out of there as fast as I could. We finally made it back to our neighborhood and to the house we were staying at. Me and Eric and 3 other guys were all roommates there. The first thing I did when I got back was jump in the shower. I even threw away my shirt. Eric wasn't too fazed by what happened once we got back. He said he would pray for the old man and hope he comes to know the truth. All we can do is plant the seed. Now hopefully God stirs his heart and shows him the way. But I wasn't over it. I couldn't shake the feeling I got from him. I hoped and prayed it would go away, but even after a couple days and an inspiring church service, the old man still haunted me. I kept having terrible nightmares about him and his house. I would be knocking on his door, only this time I was by myself. The door would open by itself, but nobody was home. I then would enter timidly and walk down the hallway, but it never led anywhere, and the further I went, the hallway would start to enclose and shrink until soon I was trapped in what I perceived to be a grave where I would wake up shortly after. Eric started to notice how tired I was looking and asked me if everything was okay. I lied and said yes. He then suggested we take a break from everything and take a weekend to go camp and relax. As much as I didn't feel like camping, I thought perhaps a break in my routine would be just what I needed to escape these feelings and nightmares I was having. We drove up to the base of a mountain Eric had heard about well out of town. The openness and the cool air, I had to admit, was nice. After we parked the car and hiked in a little ways, Eric made us some dinner on his camp stove. We ate and had fellowship. We talked about the future of the church and where we were going in life. It was such a nice distraction from my thoughts, I began to almost feel normal again. I told Eric, who was then reading from his Bible, I was going to take a short hike and that I would be back soon. I made my way around the base of the mountain and felt truly inspired and full of joy by the beauty of this place. I looked around to make sure I was alone when I decided to go on my knees and pray for strength and whatever else I could think of that I needed. I closed my eyes and began to pray. I was about halfway through when I opened my eyes. For whatever reason, I couldn't hear them. Then I saw them and heard them all at the same time. They were thunderous. There had to be thousands of them. Flies. I was in a swarm of flies. They had surrounded me. I tried to brush them away frantically, but they were everywhere. The air was thick with them. I could feel them crawling and buzzing on my face, in my mouth and ears. Extreme panic set in as I started to run back to camp, screaming at the top of my lungs for help. I think that's the only thing that kept me from swallowing them. When I made it back to camp, Eric was there asking me what was wrong. By that time, the flies had thinned out considerably, and I kneeled over next to my chair, coughing and throwing up. I fell over on my side trying to catch my breath. Eric was bending down next to me. "What happened?" he kept asking. Finally, I uttered the word. Flies. Flies were everywhere. A look of amazement went over his face, and I could tell he was trying not to laugh. He then handed me a bottle of water. "Drink this," he said. "You'll be okay. Maybe just stick around here from now on. Who knows what kind of dangers are out here? We should be more careful." I just laid there for some time before I got up. All I could think about was how that wasn't normal. I knew it wasn't normal. Something was happening to me. I was consumed by fear. I started to clam up and keep to myself. I just wanted to go home at that point, but I tried to tough it out, at least for Eric's sake. I knew he needed a break too. I spent the rest of the evening praying and trying to make sense of what had happened to me while inside my tent. When it got later in the night, I began to calm down. I felt comfort in my prayer that I was being watched over now. I talked to Eric off and on from inside until I eventually fell asleep to the sound of the dry desert wind blowing against my tent. I was sleeping soundly until something woke me up late into the night. It was Eric yelling at me to wake up. "Wake up, Will. Wake up now." "What's wrong?" I yelled back. I opened my tent, and there was Eric standing by the dimly lit fire, not moving a muscle. He was frozen in fear. Then I learned why. Just in front of him was a very large wolf. I couldn't believe my eyes. I slowly unzipped my tent and got out. "What do we do?" I said, in a soft-spoken manner. Eric was visibly crying at this point. "I don't know. I'm going to make a run for it. I'm going to make a run for the car," he said. The wolf was growling at him when I got out of the tent. As soon as I did, the wolf changed direction and now was focused solely on me. I think this is what gave Eric the needed courage to run. "Do not run," I commanded him. "He will give chase." "Don't do it, Eric. Just stay completely still." "I'm sorry, Will. I'm sorry." With that, Eric started to run back to where we had parked the car. I didn't move, thinking the wolf was going to chase Eric, but it didn't take its eyes off of me. It started to inch itself closer to me, growling and snarling. It was about 5 feet away from me when I closed my eyes and began to cry out to God to help me. I didn't want to die. I was afraid, very afraid. I fell to my knees, feeling a tremendous comfort begin to fill me, and opened my eyes, looking up towards the sky when I saw a bright light above me. I closed my eyes again, still praying, when I heard them. I opened my eyes suddenly to witness several black forms shoot their way from the mountain at this light, as if attacking it. There were so many of them coming directly from the mountain. I looked up and saw the darkened forms completely surround the light, until I heard a loud noise crack like a gunshot echo above me, and the light disappeared. The comfort I was feeling also went away and was replaced with a horrible dread. I watched as this huge black mass descended down from the sky in front of me, right in the midst of the wolf. I heard the wolf cry out in pain and watched it fall over dead. I took a step backwards as the black mass fizzled out into nothing, and all that was left was the dead wolf. As I got closer and examined it further, I noticed not only was it dead, but it was also in a very advanced state of decay. I pinched my nose, trying not to puke, as the smell hit me right in the face. The dead wolf started to move and shake. Its innards were exposed, and I could see them starting to pulsate. Then all at once they opened, and out from the inside of this dead wolf came a large swarm of flies hovering above it. Unable to move from the complete shock I was in from what I had just witnessed, I watched as this swarm of flies transformed into the shape of a man with dark glowing eyes. His mouth began to open, and out of it came a very frightening sound. I held my hands over my ears, begging him to please not kill me, when it transformed back into a swarm of flies encircling me before diverging in all different directions, leaving me there crying and feeling hopeless. A few minutes passed when I heard my phone buzzing in my tent. It was Eric letting me know he was in the car and had called for help. I got all of my stuff and met him at the car. He looked amazed. I guess because I wasn't eaten by the wolf. I didn't say a whole lot to Eric that night or the rest of my time in Gallup. Shortly after all of this happened, I booked a flight back to Illinois. I thought I could escape whatever evil was tormenting me. And I did for a while, but whatever that thing was followed me back home. I kept having horrible nightmares, and strange things happened to me. Eventually it all died down and went away. At least for now.